most people hearing Afghanistan will think of 9/11, the Taliban, Al-Qaeda, Osama bin Laden, but the persecution of the Hazara predates all of that. It actually goes back as far as the 18th century. Hi, so my name is Ali Mirzad. I am a Hazara Canadian. I reside in Ottawa. Uh, my family immigrated to Canada in 1989. I was very young. I was only 7 years old at the time. And so my parents, like many other folks from Afghanistan, fled the war, the Soviet invasion at the time. And we, through a journey of going through several countries, such as Pakistan, Iran, Dubai, and eventually Morocco, we ended up in Canada, Montreal. And Canada is where is home for us. The Soviets had left and the Taliban came. Before the Taliban, there was a civil war. It just nonstop one war after another. And our people, the specific ethnicity that I belong to, the Hazaras, we are today labeled as a religious and ethnic minority in Afghanistan, unfortunately. But this was not the case always. We were one of the largest ethnicity that lived in Afghanistan for a very, very long time throughout the history of that country, and perhaps predating the modern Afghanistan, the formation of Afghanistan. Today we're a religious minority and a ethnic minority due to perpetual persecution throughout history. To kind of lay the land, so to speak. It is a country that is on a crossroad of Silk Road, the ancient Silk Road. You have China on one end, India on the other end, Pakistan now since 1947 and the partition of India, and you have Russia. So we have a lot of neighbors, and Afghanistan, since the formation of the country as it's known today, is a country that's constituted of multiple people, multiple ethnicities. You have the Tajiks, you have the Uzbeks, you have the Pashtuns, you have the Hazaras, and there are many, many, many other ethnic groups. But the predominant religion in the country is Islam, and within Islam, there are two sects, one's the Sunni and the other is the Shiites. The Shiites are in the minority. But being a Hazara a Shiite, so first from an ethnic minority, being a minority in that sense, and then the religious aspect being a Shiite minority, we were always perceived as infidels, as foreigners. And there's also the facial attributes. The Hazaras have very Asiatic, Asian features, flat nose, cheek, eyes are very distinct. And that made us easy targets to pick on. So in the 18th century, in the late 18th century, one of the ruler of Afghanistan was named Abdurrahman Khan, and he was called the Iron Fist ruler for his brutal way of ruling and governing. And in the quest of annexing all the lands under his rule, and proclaiming himself the one king of Afghanistan, he eliminated any party that did not agree with him. And the Hazaras, according to archived data that's available today, for example, in 2013, the UK Border Agency released a report in which they built that report based on archive information that they had available to them, that the Hazaras actually constituted 67% of the population of Afghanistan. Whereas if you look at the recent surveys, maybe in 2020 that I looked at, the Hazaras represent 8% of Afghanistan. So we went from 67 to 8%, and that's basically as a result of perpetual persecution. So my family, my father, like many other people in Afghanistan, when the Soviets invaded the country, fled because of the war. My father obviously wanted to bring his family to safety, and many Afghanistanis from Afghanistan fled to either Pakistan or Iran, wherever they could get to. And that was the primary reason that my father also fled. My father also was injured in that civil war, the Soviet invasion. He actually was injured in his left knee. And as a result of that, even today, he has a physical handicap with that leg. But despite his injury and despite all the obstacles and the danger, him, like many other folks, decided to leave. And we, as far as I know, what I've been told when I grew up, that my father and my parents left pretty much everything they had, all their belongings. They only took very few clothes, maybe some personal belongings with them, and left their house, their land, everything behind them to bring us to safety. And he did not stop and settled in Pakistan or Iran or anywhere else. And part of the reason because of that is because my father, when he was young, he used to work in Bamyan, and the province of Bamyan, where the giant Buddhas of Bamyan are. And the Buddhas of Bamyan are actually a UNESCO site. And basically, my father worked there in the tourism industry. And having met and interacted with some Canadian tourists, coincidentally, back in the days when there was no war, my father had learned about Canada and how great Canada was and how it's a country that's peaceful. And that's where the interest grew in him to come to Canada. So when the Soviet invaded and my father had to flee the country, he had set the bar very high for himself. He said in his mind that the only place I'm going to bring my family is going to be Canada, and nothing stopped him, and that's where we are, and we're very grateful for. So my interest in advocating for the human rights of our people started at, I would say, almost in the 90s. Perhaps the most signature event that led me to be more interested was in 1995. And at the time, I was very young, obviously, but there was a very key event that happened for Hazaras, and that was the assassination of a fatherly figure for the Hazaras. His name was Mazari, or Abdul Ali Mazari. And he, the best way to describe him, I mean, he was our Gandhi. He fought for the rights of the Hazara, and he fought for the freedom. He gave us a voice, and unfortunately, in '95, he was assassinated by the Taliban. And this is, at the time, the Taliban is at their height of their power. They pretty much have the total control of Afghanistan. And having heard of his assassination, I mean, I think, 13 or 14 years old at the time. And I remember this is the era where VHS tapes exist, and the gruesome and gory detail of the atrocities the Taliban were committing were actually being circulating in the Western Hemisphere through these VHS tapes. And, at that age, obviously, you being exposed to that kind of stuff, and it's not that, my parents were not responsible parents exposing me to the atrocities. It's just that when you have gatherings, elders, people come to a home, and the main talk is about what's going on back home. And this was a very big deal and very, very big news that had happened. And I remember it, everyone was in a state of shock. I mean, the equivalent, the only thing I can put that in terms of an example that could probably explain it best, the impact that it had. Think of the assassination of JFK, how that shook America. And still, I mean, I was young, but that was a very key event that led me to be even more curious about why us, why. A lot of the folks that were gathered in my home back then with my parents, elders, the main things that they were saying is that even in a civil war, many of the other ethnic groups that were all fighting against one another, but one common goal they all had was to also fight against the Hazaras. And that obviously, it brings you questions to your mind that why us? What is it that what's so special about us? What did we do wrong? And later on, as I grew up, I became involved in the community. So we're talking now of 2011, 2012. 2011, 2012, in Ottawa, we established the first community center, and having the opportunity for the first time to interact with other folks from back home, and a lot of them from my age and some a little older, and hearing their stories, how they came to Canada, and hearing the common collective pain and suffering that everyone had endured because of all these years of persecution, um, solidified the base of my uh, feelings, and also the want of wanting more, to do more. And during those years being involved in the community, uh, the Taliban had long gone since 9/11. There was a new government that was installed, under Karzai, and then after that under Ashraf Ghani, the current president of Afghanistan. And unfortunately, the persecution of our people continued, despite the fact that the Taliban had left. So going back to the era that I was in the community and involved and hearing all these atrocities, being in the position of being involved in the community, the only thing we could do in Canada was to do and organize vigils, peaceful protests in front of the Parliament, and inviting people to take part of that. At one point, I remember in 2014, I believe, or 15, there was 31 innocent civilians that were abducted by the Taliban, and these were all Hazaras. We organized a event in front of Parliament, and we even put an ad in Ottawa Sun to raise awareness, to basically tell people about it. And we always invited the government to take part in these events, whoever members of Parliament, MPs, MPPs, to come and maybe say a few words, and us to give them sort of a formal statement in writing to say, this is what happened and this is what we're hoping that you guys do about this, hold the people accountable back home, and to sort of try to push for some change and justice for the victims back home. But unfortunately, these protests that we do, there's only so much impact that it does. I think looking backwards, as sad as it is, I think it's more from a psychological perspective. For ourselves that we do it, we feel that we've done something. But how much of an actual meaningful impact it has had on the folks back home, that's subject to debate. With these events during the time of the community until 2015. In 2015, my term as a president of that community organization ended, and I felt that, having learned so much from the community, from the experiences of the community, and having some interaction with some government officials, that I could put all of that together and do something more. And what I decided to do was to write about it. The reason I decided to write about it is that the majority of the people that were non-Hazara or non-Afghanistanis that I was interacting with did not even know what the word Hazara meant. And so there was the need of educating people on what we were, what Afghanistan is all about, and what's happening there, to raise awareness on that. So I started writing some opinion pieces, and some of them got published to local online publications such as iPolitic, Huffington Post, Hill Times, and whatnot. And that encouraged me to raise, because it raised some awareness, and some people were asking questions on social media or by contacting me via email. It pushed me to continue writing. And all the while that I was doing these writings, we had already, throughout the time that we were in the community, we had some interaction with Senator Mobina Jaffer at some of our events. So I contacted her office, and this was early in 2015, I believe. And I contacted her office and I said, what can we do to have a statement read in the Senate? Like to have a statement of solidarity, I think that would go a long way and it would mean a lot. And, a lot of the events that had happened, we had already communicated to her office and we had sent these information packages about all these atrocities that were happening. And luckily, they were very supportive of that. And so we worked for over a year on crafting the wording of the text and what should be said. And eventually in 2016, in November of 2016 specifically, Senator Mobina Jaffer read a statement of solidarity in the Senate. And it was the first time that the word Hazara was being uttered inside of the Red Chamber. And that was, a pretty big deal. Subsequently, a lot of more officials, some senators and MPs expressed interest and asked questions. And from 2016 onward to 2018, we continued the work and I continued lobbying, so to speak, members of parliament, people that were involved in the human rights committees to get their interest. And, a lot of these folks that were in these committees were being shuffled from their role. And then you have summer recesses. So it did take a lot of work and energy and patience, but eventually it paid off. And in 2018, in December 2018, we were able to have a similar statement that was read in the Senate to be read in the House of Commons. And all the while that I'm doing this lobbying behind the scene, I also continued writing about events that were happening in Afghanistan. There's no shortage, unfortunately, of atrocities. I often shy away from calling myself an activist because, what is an activist? What does it take to qualify as an activist? What does it mean to advocate for something? And when is it exactly enough to say that, you can call yourself an advocate of a certain issue? So I always say to people that I do whatever I can and as much as I can, given the tools and the opportunities that are available to me. And one of the things that is abundantly available in Canada is technology. We have access to telephone, internet, and those things may seem very, they may seem things that we may not even think about, but looking back at my country in Afghanistan, where electricity is at best in the capital available only for a certain amount of hours, and internet, and in that region of the country and the world, a lot of the social media and internet is monitored and controlled as well. So being in Canada, having access to technology, I utilized just that. I didn't know what the word lobbying meant before I started contacting people. And at one point I was told, well, that's called lobbying. And I said, I guess, okay, sure. I guess that's what it is. When I say lobbying, I really mean harassing and calling people 15 times a day, sending them 13 emails a day, calling them right after the email is sent. Did you get the email? And until they say yes, or until they confirm. Sometimes I send the emails and they don't confirm, and then I call them back and I leave voice notes. Did you get the email? So, what I mean by lobbying, I mean that exactly. I emailed people. I basically creepingly, I went online on the website of the parliament, finding out who is part of which committee, where they are, which writing they are from, and what's their email address, how to contact them, their staff. A lot of this information is all available to the public on the public domain. And that's how I did it. And, once you start emailing one, you get the name of that person, you build a relationship. And the groundwork, I think, for the Senate statement was done with the office of Senator Jaffer. So obviously, there was a lot of interaction with that office. But for the Parliament, for the House of Commons side, this issue, we started by meeting one member of Parliament, Mr. Kent, Peter Kent. And after that, meeting his office, we also met through his office. His office facilitated a meeting with the Foreign Affairs, Global Affairs, as it's called now. And we met, when I say we, a group of Hazara Canadians from Ottawa, we met Foreign Affairs, and we told them about the issue. And from there started the chain of event that they basically push your email and your file to another office, and that office sends it to another office. The whole House of Commons component actually went from 3 members of Parliament shuffling the portfolio amongst themselves, and eventually, when it got read in the House of Commons, the timing, I learned that they get to read these kind of statements are limited and they have turns. So they had to collaboratively, and it was good because we had communicated with 3 or 4 of them. They actually agreed to give each other the time slots so that they could facilitate this. It did take 2 years of pursuing them and a lot of phone calls. And at one point, I think, if I can remember, if my memory serves me right, the gentleman who actually announced me the day that the next day, this is going to be read, he said, "You know what, Ali, this is going to be done if it's the last thing we're going to do on this planet." So, and it was a sense of relief, and you can see and you can, you can feel that it was the culmination of so many emails, so many calls. So yeah, not a particular special formula. It's just a lot of, I call it jokingly harassing, but it is really bad. You are technically calling them incessantly. And these people have, 20, 30 different other files they work on. A lot of members of parliament are approached by their own writing, people from their constituency. Then they have their Hill work. And at the same time, they have these other matters such as this. So, you may think this is the most important thing for you, but for them, this is one of 15 or 20 different matters that they're working on. So it takes a lot of convincing, and you have to be persistent and keep on going and not taking no for an answer. I was told in the course of that 2 year that we're not sure if this is going to happen. We're not sure how this is going to work because there's so many components. You look from the political aspect of it. Canada is technically still engaged with Afghanistan. It has diplomatic relation. We have an embassy there. So there's so many delicacies, and the text itself that was being that had to be read in the House of Commons, that had to be vetted. There are so many intricacies and so many components. And at the beginning, there was a lot of, we're not saying to Ali, but, don't lose hope, keep at it, and we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you, we'll get back to you. And, I kept pushing, and I kept pushing, and I kept pushing, and I kept pushing. And, luckily it paid off, it worked. Obviously, in the meantime, the atrocities that were happening back home, that didn't stop. So we continue to rally people. We continue to bring people in front of Parliament and do protests, demonstrations, and vigils, whether it was here or in Ottawa or in Montreal or in Vancouver or in Toronto. Toronto has actually the largest population of Hazaras, as far as I know, in Canada. So a lot of demonstrations there. And at one point, actually, we organized 3-4 bus load of people to come from Toronto to Ottawa for a protest. And I think, the lobbying aspect is not so much just the email, but it's a multifaceted. It's a combination of so many things together. And I can't say or take the credit that the statement was read because I called 15 times a day of Parliament. I think it's just collectively the effort of the whole community, all of the Hazars, and our friends that are advocating for this on our behalf that are not necessarily Hazaras, publishers that agreed to publish these articles that I wrote, people that are asking questions on social media, average Canadians. I talk to anyone that I can have the opportunity to talk to, and I talk to them about the issue, and they talk to other people. And by raising awareness, I think that also, in its sense, is lobbying itself too. Not necessarily lobbying the government, but you're lobbying on a larger scale of the whole population. In terms of challenges, I would have to classify the challenges I have faced in 2 categories. First, in my journey as a freelance writer and writing about things, The first challenge that I ever encountered was, what is a Hazara? Who are you? Who are these people? The lack of knowledge, and then being questioned. Well, what's the relevance of this, Ali? I mean, this is all, very tragic, and our heart goes out to these people. But how is this relevant to Canada? To I guess one of the challenges in terms of the writing aspect was to highlight the relevance of it. I mean, Canada did send troops in Afghanistan. We've lost men, and Canada has paid a lot of money in aid to Afghanistan. So to kind of refresh people's memory to say this is why it's relevant. We've sacrificed a lot in Afghanistan, so we owe it to ourselves. We owe it to those who have lost their lives, and to the ongoing tax dollars that are going there to hold the people in charge in Afghanistan to account, and to basically make sure that they safeguard the life of all citizens, no matter what their ethnicity is, no matter what their religions are. So, I mean, that's one challenge in terms of writing and making it relevant to Canadians and to publishers in Canada. In terms of the advocacy and the activism side of it, or the lobbying, I think one of the main challenges was having to deal with the government. I think it's a cliche, and a lot of it's one of those old slogan: "Things move slow in the government," and they really do. You're dealing with their schedule. You're dealing with summer recess, Christmas recess, Parliament shuffle. Every time you're dealing with someone, and then you learn that they have been shuffled out of their role. Then the summer recess happens, and then they return, and then you learn that the staffer that you used to deal with, that knows everything about the file, is no longer there, and it's now someone else that you got to deal with. So that's one challenge, and then having them to prioritize this file over other files that they are working on, and having them to move fast enough. I mean, you want this to happen tomorrow or today because it's urgent, it's pressing, it's tragic, it's the most important thing in your world, but they may be working on 15 other human rights file, and how do you persuade them to prioritize this? So I think that's another challenge. And, it's not to belittle one tragedy over another. I mean, the life of any human being is important, and the loss of any life is tragic. But I think one of the main challenges is that you're trying to work through the mechanism of the government and working with their schedule and trying to make sure that people don't lose interest. If you don't email them enough, or if you email them too long enough and leave large gaps between each time you're communicating with them, there is a chance where they lose interest and they forget about you. And I guess another component that I can think of is uniting people here in Canada. Hazaras, there are significant, I don't know exactly, and I don't know if there was a census done in Canada in terms of the population of Hazara in Canada. I certainly don't know what that number is, but we're spread all over the country. And when you look at technology, Facebook, Twitter, it has existed for quite some time. But when you look at if you look at history on a larger scale, it's very young. Technology, Facebook and Twitter are very young, and the ability to connect everyone holistically in Canada, whether they're in the West Coast or in Central Canada or in the East Coast, all together, and bring them under one platform. That is, I think, one of the challenges we have had and we do have, and that we're hoping to achieve, to eliminate as a challenge or as an obstacle. In fact, in Toronto just last year, a organization was created by the name of the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services, or CHHS. And its goal is exactly what the name suggests, to advocate for the human rights and humanitarian services. And hopefully, under that umbrella, we can unite all Hazaras across the country and have a more unified approach to what we're asking. I mean, there are very educated and talented people that could probably make a meaningful contribution towards the advocacy and activism component, but that either don't know about us or we don't know about them. And I think that's going to be something that we're going to have to work on and probably look to achieve and eliminate as an issue. What I would ask, I guess, my call of action to Canadians, the Canadian government, the average folks, anyone who's listening to this is get involved, research, find out, ask questions, search the word Hazara, try to learn who we are, and try to get in touch with any local folks that you can find, or organizations such as the one I mentioned, the Canadian Hazara Humanitarian Services in Toronto, and trying to, once you get involved and you know more about us, you can help by joining us and raising your voice along ours, asking the government in Canada to stand up for the human rights of the Hazaras. We're in a country that these values are enshrined in our national identity. It's nice to say that, and it's nice that it's to see that and read it in writing, but we have to walk the talk. And so we need to mean what we say and say what we mean. So if in order to hold that true Canadian spirit, I invite all Canadians to join us and to demand Canada to take action and to stop the persecution of the Hazaras.